Thank you very much. It is my great pleasure to be here, and I thank you for this invitation. So today I'm going to talk with you about a subject that is not weather modification. It's more about climate geoengineering. It's about climate geoengineering research. And as I present to you today, you will see this is becoming a topic of increased discussion and probable likelihood of potential deployment into the future. So what I'm presenting today is not about deployment, it is about research, and it goes beyond the scope of what you're considering here. So before I start, just to give you some background on AGU, if you're not familiar with AGU, American Geophysical Union, the title is American, but we are a global scientific organization. We publish 24 peer-reviewed scientific journals. We convene scientific meetings. Our last meeting was held in Washington, D.C. We had over 30,000 participants at that meeting. Some of you may have been there. We have honors and recognitions to recognize accomplished scientists. We advocate for scientific funding. We communicate to policyholders. And these days, especially in the United States, that's very important because of the climate, the political environment related to climate change. We advance data management and ethics around those data processes. We have community science programs and diversity, equity, and inclusion standards across STEM. We offer career development tools to advance the Earth and space science workforce. We advocate for ethical practices, and we have members in 147 countries. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. Our staff, we have about 140 staff members. I'm a member of that staff and the staff leadership for AGU. So our demographics, we claim 60,000 members globally from 147 countries, and about 4% of our AGU membership resides here in Japan. So here's some additional numbers in case you're interested and want to know all of the numerical details around AGU. We have about 300,000 social media followers. We have a community of advocates and professionals. We have, again, on the far right, the number of attendees at our last meeting. Our upcoming meeting, it will be held in New Orleans in December of this year. We anticipate about 20,000 participants at that meeting. We have about 20,000 reviewers for our scientific publications, more than 1,000 editors and associate editors for our 24 peer-reviewed journals, 75 council members, 16 elected board members. So we are proud of the interface between science and our members. Again, the fall meeting is our big deal meeting. That plus our journals is the way a lot of our members interface with us. We do have an ocean sciences meeting, which is held every 2 years. We hold Chapman conferences, which are actually generated through members. So scientists recommend a Chapman conference on a certain topic. And those conferences are usually 100 to 200 persons. So any scientist, any member of AGU can initiate a conference proposal, and we support that execution. We also hold joint scientific meetings, and in fact, we have a joint meeting with JPGU that's coming up here in the Tokyo area on the 24th through 29th of May 2026. So just be aware in case you're interested in attending JPGU AGU joint meeting in 2026. So the background for today, I'm going to talk with you about the ethical framework. And this is ethical framework for climate intervention research. I use the term climate intervention as opposed to climate geoengineering, but they're the same in terms of practicality. I'll tell you about our role at AGU. I'll tell you key messages around this. I will relate that back to the work you're considering here, and then I'll talk with you about the 5 ethical framework principles, and then the challenges, opportunities, and next steps. And this is closely related to what you have laid out in the talks yesterday and approaches that you're taking here in terms of what you're calling the LC, ethical, legal, societal issues. So just a reminder, the differences between what I'm talking with you about today and what you're studying here. So weather modification aims for local short-term changes, like increasing rainfalls in specific areas, which we've heard a lot of over the last 2 days, while climate geoengineering seeks to make large-scale, long-term interventions to counteract global climate change, such as reflecting sunlight back into space. You probably do have strong feelings about climate geoengineering, whether it should or should not be considered for deployment. I think all of us have some feelings around that. Should scientists be trying to geoengineer the climate? But regardless of your feelings, the reason we're doing this is around the research that's needed to understand options that might be needed for the future. So for weather modifications versus climate geoengineering, the key differences are in their scale, their time frame, and their goals. Weather modification is local and tactical, while geoengineering is global and strategic, and therefore the implications are much more severe. However, similar ethical and governance principles might apply. So what I'm presenting here today is not to, this seems to be fading, is not to say this is what you should be doing, but it's good to see that the Moonshot program is already considering ethical principles, and you're considering them from the start. So I was sitting here breathing to myself that, boy, this group has it together, because you're starting off and you're already adopting things that we're saying, and we're convincing other people doing climate geoengineering research that they should adopt and abide by. So why is this important for us? So this is about global warming and the impacts of climate change and what's happening in our world. So in 2015, the Paris Agreement by the United Nations process set an aspirational target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, and they set those targets, and those were adopted by 196 countries. So this group is celebrating because that was the first time globally that 196 countries had come together and said, yes, we agree to try to control our global emissions. We're going to report those emissions annually, and we're going to set new standards every 5 years. So people are celebrating. We're making progress. We have some goals, some targets, and we're going to get there, folks. The challenge is this. Global emission reductions are not being met. In fact, if you look at the data, they're going in the opposite direction. Targets suggested global greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced by 45% from the 2010 levels to 2030. We're nowhere close. And reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And I could show charts on what the global emissions of greenhouse gases have been, and you will see that we had a little bip there during COVID, but we're back at it in a serious way. And in terms of the target for 1.5 degrees, I believe the latest report said we have exceeded that, and we're trying to meet a maximum 2.0 degrees Celsius increase. In 2022, an IPCC report found that in general, there's general scientific agreement that dramatic reductions in global CO2 emissions combined with the active removal of legacy carbon from the atmosphere is needed. So even if you level off greenhouse gas emissions, those gases are still there. So there's some need for carbon removal. We call that carbon dioxide removal technology. And then there's technology also for moderating the albedo effect of sunlight. There is an urgency here. Now in the public media, at least, people are talking about geoengineering as a real possibility. And these are some of the recent headlines we've seen from such publications as the New York Times, a lot of global public. So these are the Science magazine across the globe. You can read these for yourself. I call attention to the very last item listed there. Stardust Solutions, an Israeli-U.S. geoengineering startup, raises $60 million to build a solar reflecting system by 2030. So this was just last week. The troubling thing about that last item in terms of ethical framework is this company is doing it more from a for-profit standpoint. It's a venture capital company. They have not been transparent about their plans or their technology, and they so far there's no indication that they are planning to abide by ethical principles. I'm aware of at least one individual who was advising them, and he gave them advice on what should happen there, but I don't want to comment on that. I think the listening here is to say that this is in public discussion these days, that the fact that we have not reduced our greenhouse gas emissions in any effective way means that there's a likelihood that it increases the need for research to understand what might be needed in the future. I'll leave it at that. So a recent survey found that 66% of IPCC scientists think solar geoengineering will be deployed this century. I hope they're wrong. So here are some of the technologies under consideration. And when I talk about the ethical framework, I'm talking about a framework that would cover any of these technologies. There was a lot of discussions around, are you talking about SRM, solar radiation modification, or are you talking about CDR? When we say an ethical framework for climate geoengineering research, we're talking about ethical framework that would apply to all of these. If you look at the top right-hand corner, that's solar radiation modification. It involves either cloud seeding, space mirrors, reflective aerosols. All those things have been proposed. And on the left-hand side is more carbon dioxide removal technologies. Some have been proposed for what we call marine CDR, that's using the ocean to moderate and help absorb carbon. And then there are also some terrestrial CDR technologies that are already being implemented and scaled up. The ethical principles apply to all. Our position at AGU is that the urgent priority of a healthy climate requires enhanced climate intervention research and community engagement, and ethical guidance is needed. So we do not take a position on deployment. I hope we never have to deploy, especially around any solar radiation modification technologies. The carbon dioxide removal will be needed, there's no doubt about that, but the solar radiation modification is the one that I think give the most people concerns. So our position is we need the research to understand what's possible, what the limitations are, what are the positive, what are the negative aspects of any of these technologies. So we are strongly behind supporting our scientific community and the need for research and funding to help support the knowledge that's needed in this area going forward. So our board of directors in 2022, which included climate scientists, commissioned us to lean into this area because it was growing discussions. Our community has the largest community of climate scientists in the world. And we produced a white paper in 2022 and evolved from there to a publication that was released in October 2024. Just to be clear, AGU is not taking a position about specific climate interventions, not making recommendations on feasibility of any climate intervention methodology. These principles, as proposed in this document, are inclusive of marine carbon dioxide removal, MCDR, and solar radiation modification, SRM. So what's different about these principles? This is not the first time there's been proposals for geoengineering, climate geoengineering principles. It's happened it have ebbed and flowed with, I would say, based on the political climate. But when AGU took this on, we took on this project to help ensure that whatever was evolved here was done in ways that are inclusive, representative, and just in terms of how do we get the input on what should be proposed principles. We wanted to ensure that the research around climate intervention strategies were done in a way that would not make deployment inevitable. We wanted to make sure that whatever came forward with our support would not undermine efforts to reduce carbon emissions. And we also went out of our way to assure public participation and consultation was involved in the development of these principles. And that was a thing that I think made this process take a lot longer than we anticipated at the beginning. This was a 2-year process to develop these principles in terms of getting the buy-in and input needed to make them stick. As I said before, if you poll this room, you probably find that there are many different opinions around climate intervention research, geoengineering principles, and a lot of you will have strongly held opinions, and across our membership we found the same, and across the globe you find the same. There are people with very strongly held opinions across the board, and we sought input from all of those camps. So we did not just convene of people, like-minded people, to develop these principles. We established an advisory board, a global advisory board, to help advise on what these, on the team that was working on developing these principles. They provided oversight and guidance to the initiative. These were recognized leaders from across the globe. They were transdisciplinary, and at all career stages, we had 5 early career members as part of this process. We had ethicists, we had social scientists, we had economists, all part of the advisory board. And while I know we could have done a better job in getting the geographic representation, we did a pretty good job, I think, on selecting members for the advisory board. We also found as we were developing the principles, as we would issue, this is the next version for public comment, that there was a need to invite in others to help craft the final version, because the main version and early versions were being crafted by AGU staff members, a team of folks, including myself, where the climate science community said, we don't know these people. Who are the folks who are putting forward this work? So we invited in 12 what we call contributing authors to polish the final product, to make the final product. So these invited authors provided critical reviews and input into crafting the final principles. They have recognized expertise in different areas of technology around either our ethics and with different opinions on climate intervention research. Some felt it should not be done at all. It was a slippery slope. Once you start doing research, you're on your path to deployment. And some were very active researchers in this space and wanted to make sure we have the data we need to make good decisions in the future. I'm going to share with you some photos here and lead us up for a second. This was the first half, there's another slide following this, of our global advisory board. Some of you might recognize some of these names and faces who are part of the advisory board panel, all fairly prominent people in this space. And on the second page, I want to especially point out and acknowledge on the bottom row, far right, second from the farthest right, Masa-san, who's here in the room today. So thank you. And I think he was part of the recommendations for having this placed in front of this group. Again, a very distinguished group of individuals who helped advise on this effort that gives it credibility as we try to make impact in this space. For the invited authors, we made a conscious decision that the invited authors could not be an advisory board member. So these are names you might recognize as well. Some you may have worked with or be familiar with across various institutions. They are also highly published and well-known in this space. Almost any time you see discussions around climate intervention research, you will find some of these names. So all these people had strong input into these principles. So again, there is a precedence for an ethical framework. So anytime a technology is emerging or moving fairly fast, we sometimes get ahead of ourselves, where I think we're experiencing that now with AI technologies. It's moving fairly fast, and sometimes without the ethical guidance that's needed. And here's another case for geoengineering. The technology is moving without the ethical guidance and the governance in place. But the examples of where the technical community or scientific communities has come together to put ethical principles in place. Here's some around human cloning, development of genetically modified crops, nanotechnology, the emergence of CRISPR. All those items have emerged over the last 20 years or so, and maybe a little longer than that, but they all emerged but have governance and ethical standards around them. So what we're saying, we need the same thing in this space for anything related to geoengineering. There have also been scientific ethical codes around geoengineering. I'll mention the Oxford Principles. There were 6 scientists or 5 scientists that got together in 2009. And you can look these up, and came out with a set of principles. The Tollgate Principles were published in 2018. A Silomar conference back in 2010 had about 100 scientists got together and came up with the Silomar Principles. And then there's a UNESCO Ethics of Climate Engineering in 2023. So there are a number of different principles. But what's different about these principles that I'm presenting is the way they evolve with the global input and the chance for public comment along the way. The target audiences for the principles that we're presenting here, we have 4 primarily targeted audiences. We wanted principles for researchers, principles for policymakers, principles for funders, both public and private sector funders, and the global public at large. So this document that we'll talk about, the principles should, any one of those 4 groups should be able to relate to it, and we have some translational materials to help any of these groups when we're talking with them understand that what it is we're talking about, why it's important, and why they should care, and what they should be doing in this space. So here are the 5 ethical framework principles. Again, not dramatic, and especially after seeing some of the things that were presented yesterday, very closely in line with some of the topics and discussions that was held yesterday. Some presented a version of something very similar, but our principles are these. It's around responsible research, the need for principle-based pursuit of climate intervention research as a public good, as opposed to, I'm doing this for profit. Holistic climate justice. This area of climate justice is one of the key differences between these principles and like the Asilomar principles or principles that were discussed 10 to 15 years ago. I'm not sure that climate justice or was in our terminology then. So climate justice principles should be understood and embraced by researchers and funders, including attention to justice and moral concepts. When we first started this work, we had a lot of pushback around incorporating this concept of climate justice because a lot of our researchers said, we don't know anything about that. We are researchers. I was trained in physics or astronomy or other topics, and I don't have any knowledge or awareness of how you make that happen. So we have some suggestions on how to make that happen, what things you should be doing. Cooperative public participation, we've heard that a lot over the last 2 days from the Moonshot project. The imperative of public participation in decision-making around climate intervention research. There have been several high-profile cases on climate geoengineering where researchers have proposed outdoor experiments, and some have gone ahead with proposed outdoor testing without public awareness or involvement, and those projects got shut down. So while we were told when we first started this work that, oh, you're coming up with ethical principles, we don't have time for that, you're slowing us down. In fact, having these principles actually helps you speed up. It helps make your work stick when you do it. You don't have to stop and explain things. If you get the principles in place up front, then it will help you out in the long run. Transparency. Transparency is closely related to public participation, but it's different. Research on climate intervention should be fully disclosed and results published openly while also respecting intellectual property. So we're saying if you're working in this area, don't do it secretly. Go to conferences, present your work, let people know what's going on, share the progress. Again, because global climate change and climate and warming, global warming, this is impacting all of us and all of our ecosystems. So let's not try to say, I'm going to do this work, I'm going to keep it to myself and be selfish about it. Informed governance. So potential consequences of both positive and negative of climate intervention research should be independently assessed ahead of time, and possible large-scale testing or deployment should only be considered after governance, monitoring, and regulation systems are agreed to and in place. So this is about primarily outdoor deployment. Let's make sure we have the regulatory systems in place, the monitoring in place, and understand what the governance structure is going to be. So we have some concrete proposals around informed governance. And that's one of the lackings, one of the shortcomings now for SRM technologies. There's no governance system in place currently. There are people working behind the scenes to see if we can come up with some accommodations. It's geopolitical in nature as well, which makes it especially difficult. And we have been working, AGU was working, we were naive in thinking that we could have some governance system proposed through the United Nations process, and because of geopolitics, that has not happened yet. So here's a little bit more detail around these principles. I don't think I will bother reading all of these. It just gives a little bit more details around the interpretation on what each one means. Let me just call out under holistic climate justice. I would encourage you to, you want more detail, the report has a lot of detail and it goes into explanations around each one of these principles. But holistic climate justice includes intergenerational, distributive, procedural, and ecological justice, and ensures equitable and ethical outcomes for all, including sensitivity to indigenous peoples. And again, this group appears to be well grounded, well founded on understanding the need for such principles. So I don't need to convince you. There's some audience that have need to be convinced that this is needed and necessary to help advance this work for societal good. So here's some example recommendations for funders. So again, this has targets for funders, for researchers, for policymakers, and for the public. So for funders, these are just examples around responsible research practices. Funders should ensure research by definition assesses risk as well as any benefits of the climate intervention method at issue. So if you're funding work in this area, don't just fund it to say, go make this happen and give me the positive results. You should also point out the risk or any negative results as well. That's a responsible research practice. Principle 2 suggests how to incorporate holistic climate justice. So funders should ensure that research teams include social scientists or ethicists who can integrate moral concepts of justice and fairness. We're not saying that the scientists should become the experts in these areas, but you should have some expertise in your team that can give input to help give you guidance. Principle 3 shows how to incorporate inclusive public participation. Funders should ensure that public participation is integrated into the research, including assessment by the communities that may be affected by these activities. And when you're talking about climate intervention, you're talking about things on a much grander scale. So any outdoor experiments, especially when you have transboundary, you can't contain it within a certain geography, it becomes very important that the public is involved, and any impacted region might be consulted in advance. Principle 4 incorporates elements of transparency. Funders should be completely transparent, should respect the autonomy of the researchers, and maintain a clear separation between their institution and the research decision making. And Principle 5 ensures accountability through informed governance. Funders can ensure that research pursued incrementally is pursued incrementally, ensuring accountability at each stage. Elected councils, panels, or other bodies of public representation can serve as effective mechanisms for this accountability. So this gets a little bit to the concept of what we call advisory boards. In this space, you have an advisory board here for Moonshot 8, and that is wonderful to see that in advance. So here's some additional opportunities. There is no bright line between small-scale intervention research and large-scale that need ethical principles. If you're planning outdoor work, you should not say, oh, this is small-scale outdoor work. We don't need to be thinking about ethical principles. You need to start thinking about this even when you're doing your modeling work. There's no bright line, so we need ethical principles on this side of the line. We don't need it on that side of the line. We need to be thinking about this in advance. Ethical principles should be considered at every stage. Independent advisory boards are also a recommended practice to help assure proper governance of outdoor climate intervention research. Independent is a key word there. You need an advisory board who can tell you without hesitation when something should be done differently. Some of you might be familiar in the social sciences where you're doing research on human subject, that you're required to go through what we call, at least in the United States, the IRB process, Institutional Review Board. So we're proposing here, if you're doing outdoor research, that somewhere in your process there should be some type of review board, it has to be independent, and in the social sciences it's called an IRB that reviews your practices. Adoption of ethical principles will advance public acceptance of climate intervention research rather than slow its progress. I don't have to convince you. You've already leaned into that space, and so this is it's a given for you, but it wasn't a given in the beginning of our work. These ethical principles are intended to apply broadly, regardless of the specific climate intervention technology under consideration, including emerging technologies. We were challenged initially around the concept for these principles, whether there should be different principles for SRM versus principles for ocean CDR. And we're saying, no, let's keep it simple. Let's have a set of principles that might apply. As you're talking to policymakers or funders, they don't need to think about, well, if it's this research, we need to do one thing, that research something else. We think these principles apply holistically. And I believe they should also apply to any emerging technologies as well. So where are we on this? We have released a report in October of this past year of 2024. It's been 1 year now. And we've been socializing this work in many places, including here today, through a lot of bilateral conversations, presentations in global meetings, a lot of UN-related meetings. We presented at the Degrees Global Forum in Cape Town, South Africa, earlier this year. We were invited into ARIA's launch workshop in London, and ARIA announced that they are funding some outdoor climate intervention research as well. But they're doing it also the right way. They have the advisory boards, they've adopted these principles, and the fact that when they had their launch of their projects, they invited us in to come talk to their research teams about ethical principles and help provide framework for how some of these things should be applied. And they were embraced because the leadership there, that funding agency, said, you must do this to get these funds. And I think that's very key and important. We also will have discussions around this at the upcoming COP30 meeting in Brazil. The ethical principles are available for download at a website, and I'll show that to you, or you can Google AGU ethical principles, ethical framework principles. You'll find it. It's available for download in 10 languages. We're still working to build awareness through presentations, side events, and workshops. We're engaging in bilateral discussions with key stakeholders. We are promoting opportunities for partnership and additional input. We want this to inform science, technology, and policy development. And we're also working with others to cultivate an informal community of practice interested in ethical framework and the application for broad decision making. So again, there's been a lot of global outreach on this topic in all the regions shown on this map. And again, there's a download available. Again, this is the report copy that's available in translated into Japanese. And this QR code, you can learn more about ethical framework principles. And I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you for a nice presentation, Dr. Williams. Dear participants, do you have any questions or comments? In-person participants can use a microphone in the venue. So online questions will be also welcomed by Zoom Q&A function.
Thank you for a great presentation. My name is Manami Sasaoka. I am a speaker of the afternoon session about health issues. So I'm very pleased to have such a opportunity to communicate with you. So my question is, you used the two different words, meaning the geoengineering and climate intervention. So I'm wondering, there is any difference between climate intervention and geoengineering? Why you use climate intervention in your paper? So please give your answer to it. Thank you.
That's a great question. And we have used it interchangeably in our report. When you see the word climate intervention, you go to the definitions, we use them interchangeably. We use them to get past the initial reaction people have when you say geoengineering, to be honest. You still get, in some cases, especially in public discussions, that there's a sort of an adverse reaction based on the history or lack of understanding. So when you say climate intervention research, you don't get that same reaction until you start digging a little more deeply. So it's more of a reason to help smooth the acceptance of reading the report and understand what we're talking about. But they're synonymous. They are synonymous. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm a member of the advisor of this, and I have a question with your one of your 5 ethical framework, number 3, and you said cooperative public participation, number 3, and I remember decades ago or 2 decades, there is international research activities on the future Earth, and one of the hot subjects is co-design with a researcher and public participation. But in your slide, there is no word of the co-design to start a new research. So what kind current situation of that kind of concept? Is there any change of the system?
Yeah, that's another great question, because what we're talking about here is not so much co-design of the research or the research experiment. We're talking about engaging the public for awareness on this is the work we're doing. Co-design could talk about if I'm going to scale up something outdoors together, information that the public is aware they might have. If you're doing something in the ocean, for example, there might be fisheries in the area, there might be communities that will be potentially impacted. So it's really public awareness and participation in the decision-making on what that research would look like, as opposed to, well, I guess that could be considered co-design. We did not use co-design deliberately. We use co-design in other ways when we're talking about going in to help the community solve a problem. But this is different because the problem has already been defined. So you could call it co-design. We haven't called it co-design consciously, but it's more including the public when you, and maybe, for Moonshot, if you are planning public experiments, if you're talking to the communities about what is planned to be done, if there are people in the community that have ideas, I would say you should certainly welcome and entertain those ideas, but they're not having the final say over what's to be done.
Okay, thank you very much for the current situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question?
So, thank you very much for coming all the way to Japan, and it's really wonderful to have you here. So thank you very much. And I'm also amazed at not only by the quality of the report, but also the efforts you put into outreach, because these reports have to be read by people. At least the contents have to be communicated. So I really appreciate that. I have one question, which is about what AGU can do as a next step as a publisher of a journal. So if you look at medical research, biotechnological research, basically you have to go through. I'm at a university, and if I were a medical researcher, if I had proposed research, then I had to go through the ethical review, institutional review board process, and then I need that to publish a paper, because I would have to write it when I submit the manuscript to the journal. This is not, I think this is very superior, even artificial artificial intelligence, perhaps, and I have not heard nothing about this in climate change research. And the AGU has the power to do it, and of course, the cost, the quote unquote cost should be proportional to sort of the controversy or implication of such a research project. But I just would like to hear what you think about this. Like it has a huge leverage, I think.
Yeah, Masa, that's a great recommendation. We have heard you and others suggest something like that in the past. I think we will get there. I don't know how quickly, because right now what we're doing is looking to have work with others to have some type of structure that can validate research that's done in a space, that you've abided by ethical principles, a badge of approval or whatever. And until we have that, I don't know, from a practical standpoint, to say you can't publish in our journal until you've demonstrated the principle. We don't have a system in place for it quite yet. We're in discussions with 3 or 4 other groups in early stages around what could a government structure look like. Could there be a registry of work, for example? If you don't go through that registry, then you're not doing what you should do to have your work published. So we're catching up, trying to keep up with how it's evolving. But I think even this last item I referenced that was published last week, became public last week, the Stardust. That's a great example of why we need to have something like you're proposing, some way to validate or register or assure that the work was done ethically. So great point. We're working on it. Yeah. I can't tell you when it might happen, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah. Thank you.
Questions or comments?
Thank you very much for your fantastic talks. And my question is about the Azure process to run lessons from the other field cases. So that you mentioned about the lessons case from the GMOs and other field controversies. And so I guess that Azure guide runs the embedded lessons run from those cases. So, however, that I think that there were some difficulties to embed such kind of lesson run, because that sometimes there are many people have to say that that's not my matter, that's not my business, or that's not issued in our field, something. So that's how to overcome, how Azure to overcome such kind of difficulties for the lesson round embedded to the Azure SQL principles.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to answer this, and I'm not sure I'll get exactly what you were getting at, but I'll do my best. We want the researchers to embrace this. It might take a little bit more work. We want the funders, if the funders will say to do this work, to get these funds to support your research, you have to show you have these ethical principles. We think that's the strongest lever we can have to make something like this apply. For researchers who are struggling with, okay, how do I do this? We don't already have the workshops and the educational materials to already off the shelf to help come and talk to your research group around these are the things to consider, this is how you do it. So there are research groups, I'm sure, who want to do well, especially early career researchers, and I think it's on us to help come up with the educational process around this. And I think you can look to AGU to do more around educating practices here. Did I answer you?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And just one final point here, and I didn't emphasize this. You saw in our advisory board, we had 5 early career scientists, very early career. And I noticed in your room yesterday, you have a lot of students and early career researchers here. And I can't say enough about how important that is in this space. When you're talking about these emerging technologies, for any of the conferences and the funding, you have to make sure you are including the early career researchers, because we're leaving them a world that's, we should be ashamed of what we're leaving in terms of the way we have not controlled our emissions. So let's bring the early career researchers in. Let's make sure we're mentoring and supporting them going forward so that they can take on the mantle for us. These are tough problems. We're talking about targets for 2050, that's 25 years from now. Some of us in this room, including myself, will be out of the space in 25 years. So let's make sure we are actively embracing our early career scientists as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. I have 2 questions. First, I found it really fascinating. I'm interested in the ecological side, and I found it interesting to see the ecological justice be incorporated as part of the climate justice and not like a separate principle or something like that. So if possible, I would like to hear more about how that process kind of played out, or like what the considerations there were. I know that in the UNESCO principles, they had a discussion in the document about ecocentrism versus anthropocentrism. And yeah, so I'd like to hear some more about that. And the second question goes to what you talked about in the beginning, the need to avoid undermining efforts to reduce carbon emissions. And while I completely agree about that need, I find it a really, really difficult issue, because like even discussing the existence of carbon reduction has led to the language about climate neutral, which basically is is throwing out the whole effort from the beginning. So yeah, is there any ideas how even debating these issues might not lead to just say, people cite it and then say, oh well, we're making great progress, so basically no worries about the carbon reduction, we can just do SRM, etc. I mean, it's always hard to deal with bad actors, but bad actors will be using these kind of efforts, I feel. And what can we as an institution or as a researcher do to fight that? And these might be difficult questions, but I would love to hear about that from you. Thank you.
Thank you. You're raising very valid points and considerations, and even as we were evolving these principles, because we had people on our panels and the writing groups who was articulating things very similar, who are saying we should no way be doing research that might even enhance or promote or support the possibility of some of these technologies ever being deployed, because there's too many unknowns. And our position is, well, there are a lot of unknowns, and that's why you need to do the research. So we tried to moderate what you're suggesting as an issue by saying this is about research and it's not about deployment. But I know there are arguments that say you shouldn't even be doing the research. So I can't answer that other than say we still believe the research is needed. On your first portion around ecological justice, that is in there because there were people in our writing group who demanded that we talk about ecological justice. This is not about, because there are serious impacts to our ecological systems. I mean, we had a presentation yesterday about impacts on the coral reefs of Australia as an example, but there are other multiple examples of potential impacts of global warming beyond just human health impacts. So I think it's us really realizing the serious nature of what we're dealing with here. We don't want to be alarmist. We want to make sure we present to the public that it's being studied, that scientists, including those at AGU, would do things for the benefit of humanity, that we're working just like you are for looking at weather modification and other things here in Japan to make it better for our citizenry. So I think we have to just make sure that we are very clear and proactive around communicating with the public on what these things are that are happening, what we're doing about it, but communicate in a way that the public can understand. And the speaker just before me had a YouTube, talked about a YouTube to talk about how his work could impact heavy rain. And we need to do more of that. We need to have things in the public space, social media or whatever, that let people know not only what's going on, but what they can do, and maybe put pressures on their governments to support some additional research or funding in this area. We are in a difficult time here in the United States right now in terms of government support for research around this space, but globally, we're in a much better space. Okay, thank you.
Questions? Comments? All right. Okay, if not, let's thank the speaker again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.